Hey everyone, I kind of wanted to talk about some of the intricacies of Carl's neutral game. In particular, I'm going to place focus on some of the RPS interactions that come with fighting Ada. So Ada's going to be like right here. She's going to be trying to fight you like that. So how do you fight her? What kind of rock, paper, scissors game do you play with Ada? And what advantages do you get from fighting Ada, and how do you leverage that? I'm going to be talking a little bit about that stuff. Of course, not everything in this video is going to apply to every single character. Some characters are really great at fighting Ada, and some characters are really great at ignoring Ada, but hopefully it gives everyone a bit of an idea of like what to do versus this character. Carl's a really interesting character because he has this puppet, and it allows him to do a lot of interesting things in neutral that other characters can't really do in the same way. He's able to apply neutral pressure at relatively low risk, as well as mitigate neutral pressure at low risk as well. One of the most common things for Carl to do in neutral, and even at round start, is sort of to place himself behind Ada like this. And when he does this, Ada sort of becomes a wall. Ragnar wants to get in, but he has to find a way to get past or through Ada first. So if Ragnar just wants to come into 5B, like he could versus a lot of characters, he can't really do that anymore because Ada's going to be in the way. So Ada can sort of block his approach like that, and it halts his run speed quite a bit. But even worse than just sort of blocking him, Ada is able to press buttons, and that makes it really scary. So Ragnar puts himself at pretty great risk just to try to run in 5B, while Carl's over here sitting all safe and happy, very little risk. And that's one of the strongest things about this positioning, is that Ada is able to block grounded approaches, and Carl puts himself at very little risk. Carl is able to get like straight up damage from this positioning, and he hasn't actually put himself at any immediate risk. Of course, the risk isn't completely zero. Ada losing HP is technically a risk, or the neutral might sort of transition into a positioning that is not as favorable for Carl, and that is a risk Carl takes, but he hasn't put himself at an immediate risk to losing HP in this interaction. So what happens if Carl doesn't have Ada here? Like, Ragnar's just going to come in, press his 5B like that, and what does Carl have to do? Carl can press a preemptive button like 5C, like that. But instead, what happens if Ragnar just jumps instead and does JC? If Carl's tried to do that, he kind of gets hit, actually. Like, he takes damage for doing that. So basically, Carl's trying to play the rock, paper, scissors game here, and it actually results in him taking damage. And Carl, being the top tier character that he is, doesn't actually want to do that. He wants to sit behind Ada, let her deal with the RPS. So even when Ragnar jumps versus Ada, Carl can still be safe. He hasn't taken damage there. And even like in that situation, he can get an anti-air. Like, he has covered both the ground and air approach options just with that positioning. So that's really the power of this defensive playstyle with this character. You're sort of being a zoner and saying, do not come in on me. I want to keep you out. And if you do get in on me, I'm going to put myself in a really great position. And that's how Carl wants to play generally. It's really powerful for a lot of matchups. Not every single matchup is going to look like this. And it definitely looks like this for Ragnar, but it's not like universal. There's some matchups where Carl has to play as an aggressor, and he might even like put himself in front of Ada and like do stuff like that, like volante in front and whatever. It's not every matchup is like defensive, but like Carl is still fine doing this. Carl as a character just has a lot of flexibility. He can play rushdown or zoner like both fine, and because of that, he also is able to sort of dynamically change how he's playing at any point in time. So he can like zone and then turn into aggressive playstyle like on a dime, like really, really quickly. And that's another really strong thing about this character. But for the most part, playing this defensive playstyle is probably optimal in my opinion, at least like as a starting point for your neutral game. And because of that, this defensive playstyle mitigating so much risk on Carl's end and still being able to make plays for Carl, that's why his neutral game is actually really great. So that's why I'm sort of making this video, is sort of to describe what you can do to get past Ada and break this positioning, because this positioning is really great, but if you don't know what to do, then it becomes sort of impenetrable. So the question is, what kind of options do I have to get in on Carl if he's just gonna like stand here and put Ada in front and block my path? Like technically, Ragna could just run and run and run and press 5B, and even if Ada is in the way, he's still gonna get there and be able to hit Carl. But of course, he's scared of the buttons that Ada can do, all of the attacks. And that's the main issue. Of course, the fact that she's blocking Ragna is gonna like play a factor in the neutral, and it's definitely annoying. But the fact that Ada can attack is really what scares Ragna. So clearly what we maybe need to do is stop Ada from attacking. And one of the things you can do is just like beat her up. Like if you just sort of fight her like that, then she's not going to be able to attack necessarily. So you're going to be able to do damage to Ada, and as Ada's health goes down, she can potentially die. You might be able to hit her out of attacks, and I'm going to be talking about how you can do that in a bit. And that can definitely help you in the neutral game, and is probably one of the main strategies for neutral. Aside from that, one of the other strategies you might take, and it's probably not the biggest thing to think about, but it's definitely something to think about, is the fact that when Ada uses attacks, and if Carl blocks in the middle of it, Ada's attack will stop. So if Carl's actually just like here and sort of in front of Ada for some reason, and Ragna comes in and does 5B, 5C, and if Carl wants to like use 4D with Ada to stop that approach, you can't really do that because he's going to be forced to block. So Ada started up her 4D like that, and Carl blocks, so it's not going to come out. And that's another thing of like why Carl wants to position himself back here. But not every single time he's able to like manage that positioning. So how powerful it is to just sort of make Carl block to stop Ada really depends on the character you're playing. Some characters are just better at doing that, and some characters just need to rely on doing that a little bit more than others. Another thing is that it just really depends on Carl's positioning as well. Sometimes the ebb and flow of neutral will sort of lend Carl to actually like be in this position instead. Or maybe like you're pushing Carl back into the corner and he doesn't have as much screen space to work with, so he can't be like far from Ada. It's really just something to think about in neutral game because it can help you. One of the most memorable characters for me that can sort of do what I described earlier, where you either hit Carl or make him block and it stops Ada from attacking, is Kagura. Kagura's run speed, kind of whatever, but what he does have is Wyvern. And it goes really far, and the hitbox is really big and it's quite fast. And a long time ago, I definitely remember sort of struggling against Kaguras that sort of did that. And there's definitely counterplay as Carl, but it was definitely one of the more memorable interactions for the match where Kagura would just come in and then force Carl to block just like that. And Ada started up her 4D, but she just had to stop it because Carl blocked. It can sometimes get Kagura in, but I don't necessarily think it's Kagura's optimal game plan versus Carl to just go in with Wyvern. And of course there's some clear counterplay as Carl to him just mashing Wyvern, but it's just something you might want to consider in the neutral game if you see an opportunity to do so. If you see Carl just a little bit too close to Ada and you have a move that can hit him, it's just something to think about. But just remember that Carl's position isn't static, so you don't also want to whiff buttons unless they're like safe enough to whiff, and like just whiffing buttons still means that Ada can act. Like if you haven't forced Carl to actually block, Ada might still be able to act. Another character that's really memorable for me that forces Carl to block is Mu-12. Mu-12's drive puts down these bits, and after some time they'll fire laser beams. Ada might not be able to block them if she puts them in specific positions like that. So they are behind Ada, and that makes it really hard for Carl. Carl has to sort of like, on his side, will have to like dodge the lasers. And what can happen is that Carl gets forced to block by these lasers. Even though Mu-12 isn't really like trying to interact and press buttons to like touch Carl like that, those laser beams can force Carl to block. And if Mu-12 sees this, and sees that Carl is actually going to block one of those lasers, she knows that Ada is not going to be active. So she can do whatever you want and just like go in. So being aware of this potential and what your characters are able to do can definitely help you in the neutral game. So of course we can't just run past Ada and ignore her to win neutral, but another neutral strategy you might be thinking would be really good and obvious would just be to like run in, jump over Ada and ignore her that way and just come in with a button. And like you can do that, and when you try to do that, like Ada might do her 4D and like whiff it like that, like try to catch you, but and then you're above it so it won't hit you. But the problem with this sort of approach is that Carl is free to do whatever he wants. He can just like anti-air you. So if you try that, even if Ada uses her button there, like Carl is still free to use his 6A to anti-air you. And his 6A is really quick and has great invulnerability versus air moves. So it's still quite risky. And even if he doesn't go for 6A, he has 2C to anti-air with as well. He has a really great air-to-air in JA, one of the better air-to-airs in the game. So he has strong like air-to-air buttons or anti-air buttons. Even if he doesn't go for one of those anti-air buttons, he can also position himself outside of your air button's range and start his own pressure game like that. Like maybe it doesn't force you to get hit there, maybe you can block when you land, but still you've put yourself in a sandwich situation where Carl's going to be able to pressure you and it's not too great for you. And even if you have like a really ridiculous air button that's really hard to like anti-air, maybe you have like Hibiki like JC, I guess, which hits behind, and like it's really hard for Carl to just like anti-air that move because it's like across a button. Carl still has Vivaichi, which is this roll right here, which has frame 1 head invulnerability. So he can get out of any situation where he's sort of not too sure how to respond, he's not too sure if the 6A will work here. He can just use that and he gets out of that situation. Because of that, he's rarely at real risk of being owned by an air move. So just jumping in is really hard to do. Of course, if you are jumping in, you can sort of try to trick Carl with an anti-air move like that. So like, if you are trying to get the anti-air with Carl, like that's gonna happen. He's gonna try to use 6A. You can still hit him. Of course, for Rogden, that move is pretty high risk. You can RC it, B+, and get in that way. But it's something to keep in mind that if you want to play that RPS risky game, it's just something you can do. And especially if you are reading Carl to try to go for the anti-air. Another thing is like, you have to remember that this game is like real time, or like reaction can be hard. So if you have a character with a great air dash or really great buttons that are fast, you can just air dash in and sort of just like hit Carl before he's able to react to the situation, or like force him to block. If he's not entirely awake, like you can do that. With like Susan's JC and air dash is pretty good for that as well. Of course, like even something like that can still be anti-aired. And if Carl is awake and paying attention and like watching for it, he will still anti-air you. But it really depends on the Carl player as well. Like some Carl players are just better than others at reading and reacting to anti-airs and will catch you for those anti-airs. But that position, especially with that spacing, makes it really hard to like get some like air buttons that are like really quick. So this defense is really hard to break. Ada is sort of controlling the ground neutral, and Carl's still able to stop any air approaches. But another thing about this defense is that the spacing between Ada and Carl matters a lot, and sort of like how I mentioned before, when Carl is really close to Ada, you can hit Carl and it'll stop Ada from attacking. But also when Carl and Ada have a bit of distance, it's a bit harder for me to cover. Like if Carl is here, I can cover her stuff with 5C, and it's a bit harder to hit her because I can whiff punish. And then here, I have to actually move to be able to cover Ada. With stuff like that. So it's also sort of like a chessboard where the pieces are sort of covering for each other. Ada is like a pawn, and Carl's like a bishop or knight or something that's protecting that pawn. And you can't get to the bishop or knight because the pawn is in the way, and you can't beat up the pawn because the bishop is protecting. But sort of like chess, or maybe not like chess at all, I don't play that game, you gotta break it at the weak point. Usually, with this spacing, you're breaking up Ada. She's cool, but she's not very strong on her own. She is the weakest BlazBlue character. You can beat her up. So for most characters, your game plan is beat her up, maybe kill her, but more than that, you want to make me scared to use her. If you make me scared to use her, you can maybe just run in. Like if Ragna comes in and does something like that, and I get scared to use her because I don't want her to be beat up, then he gets in and now I have to actually interact with Ragna, which is what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to play the RPS game and interact with him. And of course, like, you've had to make a risk maybe as Ragna or something, and there's still potential for me to like do 5C and hit you, but it's definitely a lot better to have the potential to hit Carl than to not have the potential to hit Carl. And of course, if you do hit Carl, Carl has paper defense, like he has the worst HP in the game, or one of the worst HPs in the game. He doesn't have any reversals besides his universal reversal of EA, overdrive into EA, or just overdrive. So you can, if you catch him, just like kind of run train on him. So you want to take any chance you can get. Beating up Ada doesn't just help you win the neutral, but it actually has a grander effect over the entire course of the match. If you beat up Ada, she's gonna lose some of her life right here. So you can see the life at the bottom here, that green bar, and she has a bit less life than full. As well as whenever she uses the attacks, she uses life as well. And this definitely will help you win neutral too. Like, if I want to recover that life, I have to deactivate Ada, and then you can start running through her, of course. But again, like, she can eventually run out of this meter, and when she does, she sort of deactivates, and I can't use her. So she takes a while to recover, and I can't use her. So what that means is, as a Carl player, I want to play more conservatively the less meter I have, because I don't want Ada to die. I don't want her to accidentally get hit by a stray attack and then die. I don't want to accidentally use her and then like use her up and then have her die, because Carl as a solo character is not that great. He has much worse neutral game, much worse combo, much worse pressure, and that's sort of your opportunity to get in. So at all costs, I'm trying to like stop her from dying, because it kind of means like losing neutral for me. So because of that, I'm playing more conservatively with her, and as she has less meter, I might use less moves in neutral, which you can take advantage of and like when she deactivates, run through her. But not only this, it affects everything else about Carl's game plan as well. For example, in pressure too, if I lock you down and I've used a bit of meter, right? I can go for these high lows, for example. And I can do that mix up, but eventually what happens is that Ada dies as I use more and more Ada moves to go for high lows and stuff like that. So if you reduce Ada's meter in neutral, and you still happen to lose neutral after that, the resulting situation is less scary. Because Carl is able to keep his pressure up as long as Ada's around, it makes it like less scary for you. Another thing is, like, Carl does have some pressure that relies on like no meter. Like, you can do this kind of stagger pressure, for example, and so the stagger pressure has some gaps in it, but it doesn't have mix until I go for throw. And of course, if you check the throw, you get out of the pressure. Whereas like trying to get out of this pressure is quite hard. It's a lot less gaps to get out of that. So you can get out of that, or I might go for something like just a raw jump cancel to reset pressure. And you can just anti-air Carl, so it makes his pressure less scary, and it makes it less elongated. And of course, after I do hit you, like, what happens after I hit you? I can go for combos, right? Like that. I might not go for a combo like that. I might, like, that has used sort of like half of my gauge to go for that combo specifically. So what happens when I have less and less meter is that I use weaker and weaker combos. I might go for like a regen route that doesn't use Ada at all, like this. It doesn't actually do too much damage, but it'll allow me to recover some meter. And like basically I'm doing less damage because you've done damage to Ada earlier on in the match. So it affects the neutral game, it affects the pressure game, it affects the combo game when you do damage to Ada. And then like not only that, like as Carl, a lot of Carls will just end their pressure in something like 2D or Fuoco or something for Okezeme. And that Okezeme uses up some meter. So they have to do that Okezeme, and then they gotta think about the future. Will they have enough meter for pressure afterwards? Will they have enough meter for the combo after the pressure? They have to think about how much meter that's gonna take potentially, and whether that Okezeme is worth it. So if they decide that Okezeme is not worth it, you might be able to get out for that too. Another thing too is like DPRC, like versus Okezeme will also do damage to the doll, and just reversals in general will do damage to the doll. Like Ragna does Wake Up, Carnage Scissors. Versus the doll, she takes damage. Like if she actually gets hit by both hits there, she's gonna take a lot of damage. So it makes some Oki a little bit like riskier. Like he can go for like reversal save Oki with like Volante, for example, and like depending on her positioning, she might still get hit by like part of the DP or part of the reversal and take damage. And even if your reversal or DP gets punished, if Ada completely dies, like the best I'm doing is like, I don't know, I'm gonna do that and do 2.2, and Ada's still dead, and you can win after that. You can win after the resulting situation. Or I spend meter to do like a bit more damage, but like I'm not getting super high damage. It might still be worth it for you to reversal, take the damage, and Ada is dead and I can't use her for a while. Especially if you have something like burst, like go for it, maybe spend your burst, then you win the neutral afterwards. That's another thing you can think about too, is the like all of that like makes things a lot worse for Carl. Just Ada having less meter makes things easier for you in other ways that you're maybe not thinking about. Of course, you don't actually need to kill Ada, like go from 100 to 0 on Ada, to have an effective game plan. And in fact, I wouldn't recommend that being your entire goal. You're going to miss out on some opportunities to win neutral if you're just trying to kill Ada every single time, but you definitely want to focus on doing some damage to Ada as well to make me scared to use her. In doing that, you really want to explore your own character's options. What can you do to do damage to Ada? What like strings do the most damage? What attacks do the most damage? And it really depends on the character, how much damage you can do to Ada. A character like Hibiki is really great at this. He has like a string like this, and if he does that on Ada is like taken 80% life there. She like can do like one Brio and then she's dead, so she's kind of just shut off there. At that life threshold, if I do something with her, she dies, so I can't use her. So she's effectively dead at that point, and like Hibiki ends with DP, maybe she gets punished, maybe he doesn't, but it might be worth it. Especially if like he RCs the meter that he spends to RC that DP at the end, it might be worth it. But really you just want to like look at your character's options and see like how you can do damage to Ada and see how you can combo her, because a lot of those strings, like if Hibiki is doing that string on Ada, I can't get her out of it. Like no matter what I press, she's just stuck in that string. The only thing I can do is teleport her out. So if you're trying to fight Ada, what are the moves you want to watch out for? Ada's moves list is actually quite big, but there's a lot of moves you don't have to worry about in the context of actually like fighting her, like trying to beat her up. Like she can use Volante in neutral, but she's not going to really generally use like 2D, Volante, 6D, like to hit you in that sort of interaction where she's like next to you. So you don't generally need to worry about it. Same with like 3Ds, like Mix Up Tool, Fuoco. The main moves you gotta watch out for are this one here, 4D, which is her neutral poke. It has great range, one of the fastest moves she has body armor. She also might use Brio, occasionally I guess 8D, and also Anima, which has full armor. And another thing you have to like watch out for that's really important to her is just the activation of Ada right here, 5D. But like those other moves, you don't really need to think about them too much. But I'm gonna go through each of those moves one by one and like talk about how you deal with them. So one of the most important moves for Ada is this move right here, 4D. It's her main neutral poke, and it's really great. This is what she uses to stop people from just running in and pressing button like a neutral poke like 5C. With Jin, if he tries to use that, Ada's 4D will actually have armor and go through the 5C and hit Jin afterward. So what are we supposed to do if 4D has armor and you can't use your neutral pokes against it? One of the best ways to deal with it is recognizing that 4D's armor is only to body property attack. And body property is a little bit different than BlazBlue's high-low mid system. So in BlazBlue, like you can hit overheads, you can hit lows, and you can hit like mid attacks, and that's a little bit different than the body attack. So most mid attacks in BlazBlue are body property. So Jin 5A, it's body, Jin 5B, Jin 5C, those are body property attacks. But something like 2A as Jin, and this move is mid. Even though it kind of looks like a low, but it's actually not a body property attack, it's a foot property attack. Even though it's mid and looks like a low, it's foot property. And then some of his other lows like 2B and 3C are also foot property attacks. So what this means is that if Jin comes over here and just mashes 2A on Ada, she's not going to be able to start up and do her 4D because it gets hit out of it. It doesn't have the armor versus that type of attack. So basically what that means is that if Ada is not able to use 4D, then I might need to just deactivate her. And that sort of gives you an opportunity to get in. Not only this, but if you use those moves on her, you can actually combo Ada. So it's really great to beat your 4D as a neutral poke, is to just like beat her in that way. If you manage to hit Ada and your attack isn't armored, what that means is that you can actually combo Ada. And when you're comboing Ada, she can't really do too much. So if Jin goes in like this, and he hits Ada, I can't use any of Ada's attack until he stops comboing. The only thing I can do with Ada is teleport her out. Which is definitely better for me than Ada taking so much damage. What happens when I do that is Ada comes behind me, and I've given up that positioning that I really like with Ada in front. And to get that positioning again, I give up screen space, so it pushes me more towards the corner whenever you do that. So it is sort of a good thing to have forced me to teleport Ada out. Another thing is that if I teleport Ada, there's a delay before she can actually act. And you can sort of take advantage of that and know that Ada isn't going to be able to act in that time, so you can sort of rush Carl down for that period of time. And remember, even if Ada is able to act, if you hit Carl before she actually gets her move to connect, a lot of times what happens is that you'll stop Ada from moving. So what that means is that for Carl, he's not really going to be able to protect Ada through Ada's actions. What instead he does is protect Ada through his own actions. So he has a couple of really great moves for that. Like you might see him do Cantabile like this, which is a really far-reaching move. He might use Allegretto out of his dash, which looks like this, like that, to sort of hit you. He might like IAD in like that, or like jump in and try to hit you in that way. And you do have some options against those as well. What you have to keep in mind is that while you're comboing Ada, she's not going to be able to act, so you don't have to worry about Ada. You can focus all of your attention on Carl while you're doing your combo. So if Jin does something like this, you can actually like catch Carl trying to like get in on him. Like if Carl's gonna try to IAD and get in on Jin because he sees that it is being hit and he wants to protect her, Jin can reactively look for that air dash and go for Fubuki to hit Carl. Another thing is like with Cantabile, this move is great, but it's super minus on block, super high duration, really high recovery. So like, if Jin is predicting or reacting to Carl going for that move, he might do something like this, and then air dash in. So if I'm trying to protect Ada like that, and I'm not doing it at a great timing, like, Jin's gonna be able to get in and like maybe hit Carl in that sort of situation. And with a move like Dash Gredo, as it's called, you can sort of just like hit him out of the startup as like out of the dash here. There's definitely like a good portion of time where Carl's just vulnerable. So you can do maybe something like that, and you might be able to hit Carl like going for Dash Gredo. Like out of the dash right there, he gets hit. Well, property attacks are really great for beating up the doll, but she still has some counterplay. She has Anima right here, just this hit grab. It's blockable, but it has full armor. And 5D's activation here also has completely full armor. So it armors through foot, body, head, and projectile property. It's going to armor through like all of these, it's going to armor through the foot property attacks, it's going to armor through head property attacks, and even projectiles. But Ada always has armor versus projectiles. So what this means is that if we do a really basic string like before, like this, and Ada uses Anima instead, what happens is that Jin actually gets grabbed. Just like that. So basically what's happening there is that Anima has full armor, so Anima's just gonna keep on going and just grab Jin. Likewise with 5D, she can use it as well. So if Ada goes for the same string, she can do something like this. So how does that work? Basically what happens is Ada is using the 5D activation frames like this, and she is armoring through the two low 2As that Jin does, and then buffers the 4D, which has the body armor, to go through the rest of the string. So it armors through the 5B and 5C, and then hits before Jin is able to do that 3C at the end. So just again, to show it off, armor, and then activate the 4D. So Ada is able to do those two things to beat those foot property attacks, and you gotta watch out for that. Anima and 5D are really great for beating those foot property attacks, but you also have some counterplay yourself. What you can do is use jump cancelable attacks to keep yourself safe. In particular, whenever Ada is hit or blocks an attack, you're able to jump cancelable that move if that move is jump cancelable on block. So, a move like 5C is jump cancelable on block, so you can use that versus Ada to keep yourself safe. Something like 5B is not jump cancelable on block, so you can't jump cancel it. Even if you hit Ada, and this move is normally jump cancelable on hit, you won't be able to use it. So what this might look like is something like this. And versus Anima, it might look a little like this. So in this case, Anima comes out, and Jin does 2A, 5C, and jump cancels. And the Anima just completely whiffs entirely. Jin here is able to actually fall down and start beating up Ada because Anima whiffed. So Anima sort of like is in recovery, and you can like whiff punish her even. The armor is only on the startup and the active frame. That said though, Jin still needs to be careful. Anima's startup depends on the distance from the opponent. So Anima walks, and during that walk she's like not hitting you, so it takes time for her to get to you, and because of that the startup is like whatever time she needs to get to you, and then the activation that like she grabs you. When she's right next to you, it is the fastest move, so you have to be careful. And depending on the distance and how quickly like Anima was used, if it was used immediately, it will depend change how many buttons Jin is able to use before he is forced to jump cancel. And if he's too close, he might not be able to jump cancel in time. So if he does something like 2A, 2A, 5C, like that, and I go for Anima, Jin gets caught there because he hasn't reached the 5C to be able to jump cancel in time. even that string I showed earlier, 2A 5C, still has risk. If I do anima early enough, Jin can get hit. Just like that. Jin gets hit, and that's because I did anima early, and it sort of started up during the startup of his 2A. And you have to be a little bit careful with that. So what he could do instead in that kind of situation is use something like 5C. And I did mention its body property, so it can lose to 4D, so that is definitely a risk in an RPS in itself. But if he does something like 5C, he's definitely going to be out of range for anima and can always get that punish on anima. Like that. Also, 5C still is not that bad versus 4D, because you can do the exact same thing versus 4D. So in this case, he also 5Cs Ada there against 4D and jumps over the move. And he can still come down and punish Ada. So that's another good way of dealing with both 5C, or both 4D and anima at the same time. Another thing to note, with something like that, where you do 2A and I do a really preemptive anima, is that if I'm doing preemptive anima, that means I've committed to anima before you've necessarily committed to anything. So if I just do anima in neutral, you can sort of block it and punish her. You don't have to commit to the button on Ada, and if I commit to anima, then she's at risk. So yeah, using foot property attacks to beat Ada's 4D, and then reacting to armor and jump canceling to beat the anima or the 4D's armor are really effective ways of dealing with Ada. Of course, there's still 5D to think about, and it creates a couple challenges. As I showed before, Jin is able to do a string like this, and if Ada uses the 5D armor to go through the two 2As, and then use 5D, Ada is able to actually go right through the 5C, and just with the 4D, and then counter hit. Of course, the clear counterplay versus this is just don't use the body property attack. If Jin does something like this instead, then even if I armor through those two 2As, he's still doing foot property attacks, and the move is not ever going to come out. I can still go for anima here. There, Carol is really close, technically, but if you cancel into a body property attack, you can keep yourself safe there too. It's just something to think about. You have to be a little bit careful with that, and it's sort of an RPS as well. I don't know, as a Carl player, how many foot property attacks or body property attacks you're going for. I'm simply trying to predict what you're going to do, so I can get that 4D to come out, or to get the anima to come out. And because of that, it's sort of up to you to mix up what you're going to do. If you go for a string like this, and just end it there, I can just keep on doing 5D, and you might whiff attacks, or you might put yourself into a bad situation, where Jin there uses that laggy 3C, and just to show it off again, it's really laggy, and maybe I don't get the hit there with the 4D, but I definitely have frame advantage on Ada to go for it. So that is just another thing that you can do with 5D as Carl to sort of dissuade some of the foot property attack. But of course, you can still hit Ada for using 5D, and if I'm just pressing 5D like this, it's not an attack, so there isn't any risk until I actually go for the 4D or go for the anima. So you can just wait and bait it out if you'd like. Ada's 5D is really powerful, and you have to be careful of it. What it allows you to do is put a bit more risk on those interactions where Jin does 2A 5C and then jump cancels to keep himself safe. Ada's 5D has full armor, but it's not really an attack, which means she can commit into any other option. With anima, you can full armor something, but she's committed to doing that anima. With the 5D, she activates and is able to use any of her attacks. She can use that, she can use Brio, and also, the startup of those attacks is a little bit less than as if she was offline. So that's how long it takes to use Brio, but this is how long it is when she's active. So it's kind of like giving full armor to the startup of any of her attacks. That's sort of how it feels. It's not exactly that because there's still quite a bit more startup, but what it can be used for is a situation like this, where Jin does 2A5C and then tries to block. If Ada armors through those and goes for Brio, she can actually like sort of lock Jin down. What that might look like is like this. And then Carl sort of is able to win neutral from that interaction. So she's caught your jump with the Brio. So you have to be a bit careful of that. And that's exactly why you really do want to beat her up for going for that. You have to be a little bit careful of it, if it's 5D, if it's not 5D. And of course, the RPS is how many times am I going to use 5D and when are you going to jump cancel? So it's really hard to react to that jump cancel. It's definitely more of a prediction. And I haven't really talked too much about Brio, but this move has head and bone, and really that just kind of doubles up on the point that Carl is great at anti-airing, because even the doll has a great anti-air. So if Jin comes in with J2C like that on Ada, it has armor versus air moves, head moves like that. In general, this move is fairly slow. I believe it's 25 frame startup. So in terms of anti-airs, 6A is really fast, 2C is fast. Even Jin's 2C, which is generally considered to be a fairly slow anti-air, is significantly faster than Brio, which is 25 frames while she's active. So what this can result in is situations where I want to anti-air or control space with Brio, but I have to do this preemptively, otherwise Jin's just going to get in. Like, if Jin does that, Brio's not going to hit unless I do it way in advance. Like, I have to do it super far in advance, and what that means is that I have to do this before Jin has actually committed to anything. So what you might see is, like, Ada go for a Brio, and what you can do is punish her for doing that. Like, I haven't necessarily committed to doing a jump, so I can punish Ada if she thinks I'm going to do a jump, and you can bait her into doing a jump. Likewise with her other moves too, like 4D. If you bait her into using 4D, you can go back in for a punish. So something like that would work. And now you've whiff punished Ada, so you can actually play footsies with her, and she sucks at footsies, so you can beat her up in that way too. She has armor, but like it's a bit hard for her to actually play footsies. Of course, again, Carl is still a factor, but in terms of interactions with Ada, it's just something you want to keep in mind. So that is sort of the long and short of the RPS surrounding Ada. I think that's most of it. There's definitely some extra interactions that I probably forgot to talk about. Of course, there's also going to be some character-specific interactions that you're going to have to explore, especially stuff like beating up Ada. You need to explore with your own character. Some characters are going to be better at beating up Ada than others, and some of them don't even really need to deal with Ada that much. Like Valkenheim can fly around the screen a bit, and you can kind of like get past Ada without having to worry about fighting her so much. Also, not every single Carl player is going to use these tools in the same way. I know that there's a lot that don't really make full use of 5D as a tool. There's going to be Carl players that aren't good at anti-airing. You will just be able to jump in on them. Some Carl players are going to be more liberal with their doll moves. Some of them are going to ignore doll. Some of them are just going to run on you with Carl and not even play defensively in the first place. And you're going to have to like adapt to each specific Carl player differently. But for the most part, hopefully this will help you like actually fight Ada if you end up having to do so. There's also some other topics I didn't really talk about, like Volante's place in the neutral. I didn't even like talk about what you do against Fulco in general. But hopefully like another time I might go over some of those topics again. I didn't really talk about how Carl gets in either. Like I didn't talk about the aggressive play style of him. But hopefully that's good enough for now. Let me know if you have any questions, and I might make some videos of some other stuff in a later time, either like more neutral based discussion or like some other like Carl specific topics as well, like something completely different, like his pressure game, like what he can do in pressure, and that sort of thing. But peace out.